Ladies and gentlemen, to zoom in now a bit further, let's examine what's been happening in Australia in the food waste space. It's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, the Chief Executive Officer and creator of Fight Food Waste Limited, Dr. Stephen Lapidge. And I have to admit, I'm reading out all these great credentials. I've got a bit of envy here because my CV is started at the ABC at 1986, still there. So it's very short. But Steve's qualifications include a PhD and MBA. You can see why, I'm getting a bit nervous introducing all these wonderful people. He's also a Fulbright Professional Business Industry Fellow and a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and European Summer School for Advanced Management in Denmark. He's focused his career on industry-based science and commercialisation across the wildlife management, agri-food production and sustainability fields. Please, I had my factory settings reset out the back, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Lapidge.
Thank you, Pip. It's wonderful to be here. I was going to start off this talk by saying who was at the National Food Waste Summit 5 years ago, but the fact is the lights are so bright I couldn't see any hands going up, so that's really not going to work. So let's get into it. So you may ask why. One thing I would like to acknowledge up front as well is that I'm just covering the last 5 years since the launch of the National Food Waste Strategy and taking us up to 2030. There's been a huge amount of work done before 2017 and many of the people that have been doing that great work and the organisations are in the room today. So we want to thank you, but my talk just concentrates on this particular time. So why is there a grand mansion up on this slide? Well, that's Raheen. That's Anthony Pratt's house, and that's where the first round table was on food waste. And from there, you can see the process. We had the round table. We then went into sectoral and cross-cutting engagement, public consultation and so on. That led to the launch of the National Food Waste Strategy on the 20th of November, just over 5 years ago. And it was at that point that they released the initial funding around the national strategy. Josh Frydenberg launched the national strategy, was at the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre, and what came with that was $1.37 million in investment, $1 million over 2 years for FIAL to establish the roadmap around how we are going to achieve that massive target of halving food waste by 2030. And there was $370,000 allocated to the National Food Waste Baseline and a return on investment study. I think at the time there was a bit of, people were a bit underwhelmed about, they were expecting a grand announcement from the Environment Minister and with probably a few more zeros after the figure. And, but part of that was that we were bidding for a CRC at the time and a lot of that money ended up going into the CRC. So that led to the National Food Waste Strategy. And the main part of the strategy is that framework for action. That's what the Fight Food Waste Limited, as in taking on or becoming the National Food Waste Governance Entity, is really billed with delivering now. And you can see a bit of assessment there about how we are tracking against those, that framework for action. In some areas we are doing very well, established the national baseline, targeted investment, voluntary commitment, the Australian Food Pact. And some areas we've still got more work to do. But near the halfway mark, we are tracking generally pretty well against that target. What of course we need to assess though is what is the volume of food waste that we've managed to reduce over the first 5 years, and that is a harder question. Now, one thing I would like to highlight with the National Food Waste Strategy is that while the definition of the Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 is listed in there, which is to halve per capita food waste and reduce food loss, the national strategy actually commits us to halving all food loss and waste, all edible and inedible food waste. So we've really bitten off a really big task in Australia, and we do need to we'll keep that in mind as we try and achieve that goal. Or try and get it changed by a meeting of environment ministers, maybe, Peter? we'll wait and see. So in 2018, we found out that the Fight Food Waste CRC was successful. I'd like to recognise the bid team, the interview team up there. 4 of the people there are still in the room today, which is great to see. And that was the original commitments to the CRC, 121 million over 10 years. And we're actually a little bit higher than that at the moment. So despite a global a global pandemic and some pretty tough economic times, we've managed to maintain contributions, which I think is a fantastic result. What's more, we've increased in number of participants over that time. And the photo there is from the launch of the CRC, which was about 4 years ago at the National Wine Centre in Adelaide. Next came the National Food Waste Policy Action Plan. And from here, you can see that there are 5 key deliverables of the action plan. Some of them have fallen due, and you can see the assessment against them, and others are yet to occur. In fact, this must be an earlier version of the talk. The one around the Fight Food Waste campaign, that is the OzHarvest campaign, and that's been largely delivered, but that date's actually been extended out to 2022. And of course, the CRC support is a 2028 date, so that's still a work in progress. The one that we do need to be doing more on is aligning community education efforts to reduce food waste and maximise the impact and reduce confusion. And that's something we're all working hard to try and create. That has also been updated to 2025 in the 2022 annexure. So in 2019, we got our first real picture of how much food waste was occurring in Australia, thanks to Arcadis. And they released the National Food Waste Baseline. Prior to that, there were separate reports for different sections of the supply chain, looking at the volumes and costs of food waste, but this was the first report that really brought it all together. And what we saw was reported was 7.3 million tonnes of food waste, and you can see the different picture there, or the volumes for each of the different states. A couple of things I'll quickly point out. Food manufacturing, particularly high food waste in Victoria. That mainly relates to the dairy sector. And if you look at primary production food waste in Queensland, again, very high. That also relates to sugar and tropical horticulture. In 2020, FIAL published the first roadmap of how we were going to achieve this target of halving food waste by 2030. And while the details there are probably too fine or too small to go through, we are largely delivering on this. And as I'll point out in a minute, or you'll see in a minute, the feasibility study updated this roadmap only last year. Regardless, we are largely following this roadmap, and I encourage everyone to be really familiar with these documents because it was some really nice work done by FIAL. And of course, many of the FIAL team have now come across to Fight Food Waste Limited as well. So in 2021, we launched Stop Food Waste Australia following the competitive tender process to become the National Food Waste Governance Entity. You'll hear a lot about Stop Food Waste Australia over the next day and a half, so I won't go into too much detail now, but I would really like to acknowledge the 20 partners that we have in running Stop Food Waste Australia, and also acknowledge the funding from the Federal Department of Environment that got Stop Food Waste Australia going. That funding continues until 2024, but Stop Food Waste Australia does need to be self-funded thereafter, and it's really important that we get as many people involved in Stop Food Waste Australia so it does live on beyond 2024. In 2021, we had the updated baseline done, the National Food Waste Feasibility Study, and that took us to the volume of 7.6 million tonnes of food waste generated each year in Australia. And you can see the picture there, around a third or a bit over in the primary production manufacturing space, a third of households, and a third along the rest of the supply chain. What was important from the feasibility study is that, initially the comment was if we maintain our current rate of progress and ambition, we will not meet our target. And that's an important message for everyone to recognise today. But what they did show is if we do everything that is recommended in that strategy, then we can still halve food waste in Australia. You just heard from Tuan before, and Europe is probably 10, 15 years ahead of us in many ways. Certainly started 10, 15 years earlier. but I would like to think we are catching up fast, and the goal of halving food waste by 2030 is still achievable. So it is feasible to halve Australia's food waste by 52% by 2030 if the recommended scenario is fully implemented. And I underline that because at this stage we are not fully implementing all the recommended scenarios. In 2021 we also had the launch of the Australian Food Pact, and I would like to recognise the original signatories that you can see here, and also recognise the many signatories that have joined since. And Winnow also just joined the other day, and we'd like to welcome them as well. If you are not part of the Australian Food Pact at the moment, I really encourage you to talk to the team over the next couple of days and find out how it can benefit your business. So where are we at the moment? 94 unique partners involved in Fight Food Waste Limited, 34 active projects, 25 signatories. 8 sector action plans now underway, 2 already delivered, 20 students, you can see the rest of the numbers there. We have built a quite amazing media profile as well, and that's over 800 articles, and we are on track to deliver all the impacts that we said we would in our original business case. We are keen to operate as one organisation. We're established as 2 separate divisions, but we're working together hard, and that will continue to be the focus to make sure we are offering an absolutely seamless business support mechanism, whether it's R&D, whether it's the Australian Food Pact, whether it's sector action plans, and potentially a nationwide consumer behaviour change campaign. And as John mentioned in his opening speech, also potentially a policy pillar in the not too distant future. So, we have a roadmap to success, thanks to FEAL. Many of these deliverables are currently being worked on. There are some key areas there that we need to do more on around behaviour change and policy interventions and more industry-led interventions. We have 95 unique partnerships at the moment. I would like to see that double before we hold another Food Waste Summit, and I think that's incumbent on all of us to try and deliver that. So, is it feasible to halve Australia's food waste? Yes, but it will require unprecedented action by governments, industry and the community. We've got a lot of those elements here in the room within Fight Food Waste Limited, within the organisations that we're keen to work with. So my plea today is that let's just get on with it and let's achieve this target. Thank you.